Hi, I'm Mitch. Thank you for joining us today on the Restoration Road, where we're going to continue in our series with Pastor Kelly Bird, one of my best friends here today. And I want to start out by asking you some questions about the best.
Good.
Okay, you ready?
I'm ready.
Best 80s rock singer voice.
Steve Perry. No doubt. As soon as you said rock, I knew where you were going. No, there's not a better 80s rock singer, not a better 80s rock ballad singer. There's nobody better than Steve Perry.
Can you do a little bit?
And it should have been gone.
Just a small town girl.
Steve Perry, hands down.
Okay. Speaking of our best, you and I would both say that relationship with our children is just something that's none other than divine. It's something that's God ordained. And so therefore, if there's any kind of a loss there's a lot of stuff that starts happening inside us. Have you ever lost a child on a trip or anything where they were lost and you didn't know where they were?
Our fourth kid is Jake, and I think Jake was about 4 years old. Yeah, about 6 years ago. We just kind of on a whim. My wife, Kebra, had some family, extended family that lived in the Washington, D.C. area, and we hadn't really planned it, but last minute decided to spend Thanksgiving in D.C. Ended up being one of the greatest, 4-day trips we've ever taken. But one day in D.C., drove down, parked, whole family, and we walked the mall area, saw all the sights, had a really, really good time. But at the Smithsonian, kind of late in the afternoon, walking through with, the other 5,000 people that were in there. Incredibly crowded, very busy. Lost Jake. Just kind of going in and out of some of the exhibits. Thought he was with somebody. Somebody thought he was with, somebody else. And he was gone. And I think we realized it, within a few minutes. And never forget it. My kids, thank God we can laugh about it today, but they laugh about it. I had them all, the rest of them, the other four, I had them just sit down against the escalator wall. And Kebra and I just started walking this huge corridor, and I was yelling. I was yelling about as loud as I could. And it was kind of nice because people around me immediately understood what had transpired. A few folks asked for a description. I gave them a quick one. People really kind of jumped in and began to help, but he was just nowhere to be found.
How old would he have been?
He was about 4 or 5 years old.
Okay.
Yeah. And we started going upstairs and we started going downstairs, and I just remember the utter panic, absolute panic I felt in my heart. And all I could think about was somebody taking my son, and it just absolutely, I was coming unwound. And literally after about 10, 15 minutes, which seemed like an hour, we're now circled with some security there who had made their way to us. And I look over, and walking in from outside the Smithsonian with a DC policewoman is Jake. And as soon as I saw her, I went walking over to her, and Jake's right with her, and she was not happy with me, which was fine with me. I was thankful for her heart and concern. Not happy with me, thankful that she had found Jake outside on the curb.
Oh my,
Turns out he had just gotten hot and wanted to go outside. And
sounds a little bit like his dad.
Yeah, a little bit, but we found him. So yeah, amazing experience, heart-wrenching, and then that moment where you see him, unlike anything that you've ever experienced.
I remember when I was with Megan in Branson, Missouri. We were traveling about every weekend, and so occasionally I'd have Susan and Megan come, and Susan was clerking some of the auctions, and I took Megan to breakfast, and it was kind of a unique setting. We were in a condo, and we had to walk about a half mile to the restaurant to have breakfast. So I thought I'd have breakfast with my daughter that morning, and I'm holding Megan's hand all the way up there. And we finally walk in the restaurant doors, and I look at the menu, and I let go of her hand. And I'm guessing this whole moment I'm talking about of looking at that menu is somewhere around 20 seconds. And I look down where I thought she should be, and she's not there. And I look behind me, she's not there. I do a 360, she's not there. And I start yelling her name. Same thing.
Yeah.
I'm screaming for her. We had some strange things happen in the auction business, so I had feared that somebody could kidnap her. And I just busted it down this hallway. I'm popping open restroom doors, yelling and stuff. And I look out, I go to the street side. I'd walked in from a backside to the street side of the restaurant. I'm looking in the parking lot at cars that are moving. I'm memorizing the cars and the numbers. And I'm yelling, I'm screaming her name because nobody was going to take my child. And everything you described is what I'm feeling inside. And I just try one more time. I will go ahead and open this women's restroom. And Megan had gone in there really kind of weird with a 6 or 7 year old. They just like both went in there to go to the bathroom. And it must have happened just like that, you know? And man, when I got her out of that restroom, I brought her little face to mine. I could feel her warm breath on my cheek. And I said, "Don't you ever tell your mom about this." But those stories remind me of how God feels about us. And Jesus is hanging out with a bunch of sand-hearted tax collectors. And the stone-hearted Pharisees don't like it. In fact, in Luke 15, it has sinners in quotes on what they're referring to. Why is he hanging out with sinners? And Jesus tells this trilogy, and you know it well. He talks about, first, it's all one parable. 1 of 100 sheep is lost. And then he starts decreasing the denominator, that's the number on the bottom of the fraction, to increase the value. So he goes from 1 of 100 sheep to 1 of 10 coins, and then he does something really important. He goes 1 of 2 sons.
Yeah.
And I think, and you would see it this way too, that parable probably follows three flows, 3 scenes, three movements. And the first one is that something of value is lost. Outside its gate of where it should be, you know. The second is that that value warrants an all-out search, and specifically in the context of the parable on Restoration Road. And third, when what's lost is found, there's an all-out celebration of that restoration of life. So let's talk about that first scene. The younger brother goes up to his dad and he said, "Hey, I want my inheritance now." And that was a huge cultural insult to the father. You remember that?
Yeah.
And it's like saying to him, "I wish you were dead." And then he doesn't just want the inheritance or the land, and their identity as a family would have been in the land to the listeners, but he wants the right to resell it, to turn it into cash. Yeah. Be kind of like the picture of seeing family farms get sold when they couldn't afford the farms in bad times. And Jesus is, in his story, the father does something totally atypical of a Middle Eastern patriarch. He grants him the request and he gives him the right to resell it. And don't you see a little bit how in God's grace and in God's allowable will, he knows that he created us with the will, and sometimes we even do choose journeys apart from him. I have, you have.
Yeah.
Do you see that?
Absolutely.
I mean, it's just amazing there, but it's blowing the minds of the people that are hearing it.
Right.
So the son goes off, and he does a sand-hearted living. It doesn't go so well, does it?
No, it goes poorly.
And he loses everything he has, right? And scholars debate on this little speech that he has, that he says, you know, I'm going to go back. I'm gonna go tell him, hey, I've sinned against you. I'm not worthy to be called your son. Make me one of your hired men. And he's also said, you know, gosh, here I am starving to death. In Restoration Road, I do a little one-for-one on how I think he's really saying that he's insignificant, discontent, insecure, and life is out of control. Yeah. But he's going to go back and ask for mercy. He knows he deserves justice. He's going to ask for a little less than what he deserves. He's still going to have his own earn-out plan on righting his relationship with his father. So, you know, there he is, spent, lost, with pigs, not a good place for a Jewish boy to be. And he's coming a little bit to his senses, and he's going to go head that way. Scene 2. It warranted an all-out search. What's his father doing?
Yeah.
What's his father doing when he's heading back?
Well, he's at the head of the road, and the text would indicate that he's been there. The text would indicate that he's at a point there on the road where on a regular basis he's been, if you will, scanning the horizon, looking, searching, hoping, trying his best to be aware if by chance the son would be spotted. And sure enough, on that day he was.
So the father who gave the inheritance now runs on the horizon, runs to him outside the city gates. And what's really interesting to me is that 2,000 years ago, a father would never run. Only a woman or a child would run.
Yeah.
So again, this is blowing the minds of the audience. We got a father who gave an inheritance and the right to resell it, and we got a father who ran. And the son starts to try to get his speech out, and the father stops him short. And he does 4 things. It's really interesting to me how this shakes out. He does 4 things right there at that moment. He says, quick, put sandals on his feet. Sandals delineated a slave from a son. So that meant he was not going to be a slave like he was thinking about being a hired man. He was going to be a son. And that's a sign of significance found in the father's love. He said, put a ring on his finger. That would mean that he could commit the family business. That
Represent the family.
Yeah, it would always be on his finger. It meant that he would have his desire for control satisfied in the father's power of who he was. He said, let's put the best robe on him. And the best robe would have been the father's robe. And what's really interesting about that to me is it's kind of like a security blanket. He has whatever the father has, he can have, and he's putting it on him, and it's in that desire for security satisfied in the truth of who the father is.
The best that the father has is given.
Exactly. Just like God did in the Garden of Eden.
Absolutely.
And just like God did with Christ. So the final thing's really, really amazing. He said, bring the fattened calf, and we're going to celebrate this restoration of life. Now, if the fact that it was a fattened calf meant that the family would not perform katatza on the young son, because back then, if a Jewish boy lost his inheritance to Gentiles, they would perform katatza, which was a funeral for him while he was still alive. His kids would no longer be educated in the synagogue. He would be kicked out. But a goat would have meant he was going to reconcile with the family, but a calf meant that the father who had the authority would reconcile him outside the city gates to the whole community. To the whole community.
Big statement.
So that's a picture of contentment, being satisfied in the peace, the reconciliation, with the Father. You've been there, right? I've been there. We've been sand-hearted. We've pursued significance. We've pursued security, control, contentment apart from God. And how'd it leave us?
Empty.
Empty. Insignificant. Insecure, out of control, discontent.
Out of control,
right?
Discontent,
And I'm sure if somebody's watching today, it wouldn't be too hard to identify with that.
No.
I mean, that's just the way it is. And I maintain that there's this heartbeat of those desires that God put in us in the Garden of Eden. And every decision we make.
Name the 4 again.
Significance. Security. Control. Contentment.
And I think it's important, for anybody listening today, it's really important, I think, that we say, oftentimes, as in the story of the prodigal son, the pursuit of those things often gets painted as, licentious, promiscuous, out of control, immoral, just god-awful living, with booze and pigs and women and prostitutes and drugs, and all that's true. Oftentimes, that's where people can go in their pursuit of those 4 things. But I just want to make sure, I want us to make sure that we communicate to the person who's separated from God, who hasn't been restored, and who may not be living that way. Their life may not look like that. But I guarantee you, if you look at your life today and that's you, you may not be in clubs and you may not be addicted to sex or pornography. But I guarantee you, if you have integrity, enough integrity to look at your life, you're finding those 4 things in something.
Absolutely.
or someone.
Absolutely.
And it may not look that tainted, but it's just as empty.
Yes,
Yeah.
there's always an object of our desires.
Right, yeah.
That's powerful.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just real quick. The picture of the father running down the road has always been a great picture for me of how, in God's economy, in God's design, relationship trumps everything.
Yes. Who you are is much more important than what you do, don't you think?
What you've done,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yes.
I was mad at Jake. I was mad at Jake for walking outside. I could have made a case, you know, for the ignorance and the stupidity and the irresponsibility. I know we're talking about a 4-year-old, but you get what I'm saying.
Big time.
Yeah. The moment I see him, I could care less. Relationship trumps pride. Relationship trumps disappointment. Relationship trumps the hurt that you've caused. Relationship trumps everything in the way God designed it.
I would say you've taught me that more than any other individual, because I'm a recovering perfectionist, I'm task-oriented, and hanging around you
Yeah.
has made me less of a perfectionist.
Man.
And has made me so much more relational. I've learned by being around you not to do that with my kids like I was at such a high level, I think, you know, looking back on it. To let them know that who they are is so much more important than what they've done, in essence.
Yeah, thank Gail Bird for that.
Okay, I will.
All right.
She's incredible.
So yeah, transition. You were going to transition.
So the older brother, he comes on the scene and he ain't happy. Somebody comes up to him and he says, "What happened?" And he said, "Your brother's back, and your father's happy. He's safe and sound. He's alive." And there's this restoration again. That third scene, there's this restoration of life and a celebration of that. And the older brother's not happy at all. And the father comes out to him, and he does something different now. So the father has done these atypical acts. He gave an inheritance and the right to resell. He didn't have to. He ran, that unbelievable picture. And then what we talked about was he restored him back to what he was, because of who he is. And then finally, he pleads now with an older brother. Now, what a lot of people don't get right away is that we're nearing the climax of the story, and the climax of the story is the stone-hearted brother, older brother, who's a picture of the Pharisees listening.
Yep.
And this older brother does an equally as, I guess, rude of an insult as what the younger brother had done when he says, "I'm not going in. I'm not going to celebrate."
Yeah.
And then the father does this pleading that's really amazing. He says to him, my son, you are always with me. All I have is yours. Let's celebrate this life of restoration. Let's celebrate and be glad your brother is safe and sound. This is what's amazing to me, Kelly. My son, the sandals of significance. And the older brother, he's got sandals on his feet at that moment. He's a son. You are always with me. That ring that's on that older brother's finger would have always been on his finger.
Yeah.
And it's a picture of that control that he has, the power that he has in the relationship with the Father. Everything I have is yours. He gave the best robe to the younger son. The older son is sitting right there, being rude about it. And he's got the father's robe. He's got the robe right on there. Picture of security and truth. That security blanket's on him.
Yeah.
And then he says, let's celebrate and be glad. It's that picture of the contentment of the being satisfied in the peace of reconciliation. And that older son now has an opportunity to be, reconciled with the father for his equal stone-hearted insult to the father. Don't you see this so much in organized church where it's easy? I mean, I did it. You go to church 3 times a week and you develop a stone heart.
Yeah.
It's legalism. I'm going to do this and manipulate the deity of the universe.
Yeah.
It's really, I don't know. It's like it's a mechanical obedience with the Father. It's like he's a taskmaster, and it's not about relationship at all, like you say.
No, it becomes much more about the keeping of some, not necessarily bad, but some, predetermined set of rules and expectations that 95% of the time aren't even close to being biblical. But they get set out there, and we start buying in. And as long as we say the right things and don't go certain places, and or at least don't let people know we go certain places.
Huge right there.
Yeah. Yeah, it becomes about a keeping of a list of rules, and then it becomes, and this is the part, I know I keep coming back to this, but it moves away from the thing that the Scripture continues to put emphasis on, which this father did in this parable, which was relationship. My relationship with God, Jesus said it, love God, love others.
Bottom line.
He didn't list a bunch of rules. He could have. He could have said, wait a minute, there's not a greatest commandment, there's like 47, take out your pins, here I go. No, he just said 2 things. But we want to add, just like the Pharisees did. And then when we keep those things, we get prideful, and we get judgmental, and we get critical and harsh, and we become the furthest thing from what God intended us to be.
Yeah, the Pharisees added 1,500 rules, regulations, stipulations to the Old Testament 613 laws. You know, maybe out of a good intent, but again, not about relationship.
Right.
I think the vision of church for you that flows out of you is what you just said, is to love God and love others. Jesus' bottom line of what this whole thing's about is loving God, loving others, and that's what really flows out of your heart. And your series that we did, and you said, hey, let's call it. I said, let's do this series on a priesthood of all believers. And you said, let's call it I'm a priest. Because a priest is what?
Yeah, it's one who passes along God to others.
Gets him all over him, right?
Yep.
And then can pass him along to others. Is it Kohan?
Kohan is the Hebrew word.
Is the Hebrew word.
Yeah.
You can just remember, like, if you got Kohan shoes, you're going to walk with God, baby, when you're
Absolutely.
Kohan. And so there's that loving God. The priest gets God all over him, right? And then he loves others by getting the heart of God all over them.
Yeah.
And I think we miss it, because Jesus said even the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath.
Right.
So he's saying right there, your dominant metaphor, what is it?
Yeah.
Relationship?
Yeah, relationship trumps everything.
It does.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's amazing.
Absolutely.
What do you think about this father now who gave, ran, restored, and pleaded? He's got a different heart. You know, some scholars say that's the heart of Christ, that the father in the parable is Christ. He's the shepherd with the lost sheep. He's the woman with the lost coin. He's the father with the lost sons. And you know, and in a way, it's also a picture of God the Father.
Right.
But he has a clay heart. Jesus lived where the vertical intersected with the horizontal, like a priest. He lived in loving the Father and loving others. He was the ultimate picture of everything that we were designed to be, right, and to do. How do you think we can live a life of giving, running, restoring, and pleading with others to do the same? How do you think we can do that, have that heart, that humble clay heart of Christ?
Well, great question. Huge answer, probably. Could take us a lot of different places. I would say the way that we do that, the way that we can do that is to become extremely familiar with the person and character of Christ. This story gives us the picture of the dad gives us a great picture of the heart of God. The scriptures are filled with stories like that. The scriptures are filled with examples of Christ and our Father in heaven's love for us and the character that comes with those stories. I think the more and more we become familiar with, the more and more we rub up against, the more and more we hide those pictures of truth in our hearts, I think the more like him we become. Those are great pictures, and the story of the Father there is one that's just absolutely powerful. And the more I study that, the more I understand that, the more I talk about that, the more I pray about that picture, the more I hope I become like that with not only my sons and daughters, but with the people God puts in my life.
But we see stories again and again and again of people who don't want to sacrifice to give, run, restore, and plead for the sand-hearted people out there and the stone-hearted.
Yeah.
They want to keep it safe, right?
Yep.
Because it might cost them something.
Right.
Some time.
Yeah, it might cost them something. The other thing that goes on there is, again, externally, I've lived in a culture that for so long has separated myself from them. They do this, they do that, they have this hang up, they look like this, smell like that, go to those kinds of places, and I've put myself over here. And so we've really created, you know, these two worlds, and never the two shall meet. And when this hard-hearted, you know, churched community, too many times when they've looked at and intersected with, you know, the younger brother, there's this distance, there's this divide. It's what I love about the Father. He was able to move back and forth between the older brother and the younger brother. And one didn't blow him away and one didn't discourage him. He just stayed right there in the middle, calling them both to the same thing.
Exactly.
And that's where we get off track. The church too oftentimes stands over here offended, shocked, and blown away by a younger brother living. And the fact of the matter is, it's no different than your older brother living. You've just made it different because of how we've taught them and because of the traditions and all that stuff.
Two kinds of lostness, sand and stone, one way home, clay.
Yep.
And the clay hearts are called to love the stone hearts the same way that we're loving and going after the sand hearts.
Yep.
How about closing for us? We got about a minute left, and helping somebody understand how much the Father loves them. You know, John 14:23 said, Jesus said, whoever loves me, whoever loves us, my Father and I will make our home with him. Home really is where the heart is with Christ.
Yeah, I would just encourage you. And again, like we did last time, and I mean this, Mitch means it when we say this, I would plead with you because there's that much on the line. That you would come to an understanding, that you would be open to the realization that God's love for you is so intense. It would be as if I found Jake with the police officer and rejected him, allowed him to go back out to that boulevard and be lost forever. God gave up his son because he loves you so deeply and so thoroughly and so completely. I'd love nothing more than for you to experience and know that love.
Thanks, Kelly.
Yeah, you bet.
Hi, I'm Mitch.
That was lame.